Rory never told me where he originally came from. Not that I minded much or ever tried to pry. That's how we all are here in DuBois. DuBois is a small town located in a valley between the mountains in western Wyoming, with a population hovering around 1,000 with nothing but mountains, trees, and bighorn sheep around for 2 hours in any direction. Our town is a haven to the taciturn and to those who prize quiet above all else. We're an obstinate bunch too. Always have been. When DuBois was first founded, the settlers wanted to name the town Never Sweat, after the temperature climate. The Postal Service didn't take kindly to the name and nixed it, so they named it after some senator surnamed Dubois. But in quiet protest, the town rejected the correct French pronunciation of Dubois, and instead referred to the town with the stubbornly anglicized DuBois. Rory first moved to DuBois in '98. I had been in town for 3 years by then, but social change here differs little from geological change. Both move slowly and require years to incorporate something new. And as much as I hated to admit, I was lonely. So, when Rory's battered pickup snaked its way up the dusty driveway toward the long vacant cabin next to mine, I was off my porch and at his truck with speed unbecoming of a Wyomingite. He was old even then. That first time I saw him, I recall thinking that I probably wouldn't have my neighbor for long. White, thinning hair and sun-beaten lines across his face told me more stories than he had ever recounted to me in all our years together. As he swung open his pickup door and stepped out, he introduced himself with an outstretched, calloused hand and a laconic, "Rory Woods." I replied in kind, "Jerry Wade." Without another word, I rounded his pickup and started to unload his few belongings. This first interaction was indicative of the rest of our friendship, tacit and trusting. Nearly every evening, we'd eat trout one of us had caught from the stream out back and sip a shared whiskey as we'd either watch the stars grow brighter or the fire turn to embers, depending on the weather. We rarely wasted breath with words. I'd be remiss to continue and not mention the chrysanthemums. Like I said, Rory's few possessions were piled into his truck bed, but nearly half of the bed was taken up by a large, rectangular wooden crate filled with dirt and chrysanthemums. The thing was a monster to unload, heavy and awkward. How the old man got it up there by himself in the first place, I'll never know. It had always been a mystery to me why he cared so much about those chrysanthemums. Why he'd go through all that trouble to cart them from wherever he came from. But in accordance with the ancient Wyoming custom, I never asked. He was obsessive and meticulous in his care for the chrysanthemums. The day after he moved in, before I'd even woken up, he had already dug a bed and transplanted all the flowers into a beautiful, but still rectangular arrangement right in the middle of his backyard, overlooking the river. The next day, he dug out some earth right next to the flower bed and constructed a kind of detached porch by reinforcing, nailing together, and sanding down a couple of shipping pallets. Before the sun began to set, he brought 2 rocking chairs for the porch, one for him and one for me. That little porch beside the flower bed was where he spent his time when weather permitted. He had a particular affinity for chrysanthemum petals. You'd never find him without at least one petal in his mouth. He'd often maintain a clump of them in his cheek, almost like chewing tobacco. I tried a petal once while wandering through a greenhouse. I never dared ask to try one of his. I knew by his behavior that they were sacrosanct. And it tastes like a peppery broccoli. Not bad, but definitely not a taste I'd want constantly. He used the dried flowers to make a tea, so even during the winter, he was never without the chrysanthemums. Odd, I guess, but there are odder things. Rory seemed to be a believer in talking and singing to his plants. He'd read poetry to them. He loved Walt Whitman, Shakespeare, and found guilty pleasures in cowboy poetry. He also sometimes sang, but mostly hummed, to them daily. The tune was familiar and always the same. Somewhere over the rainbow. Every morning I'd wake up and faintly hear his voice creeping through the window pane. I heard the song every day for years. At times I loved it. At other times I hated it. But now that he's gone, I miss it. I miss it so much that I try to sing it, but can barely get to Rainbow before my throat closes shut and water wells in my eyes. 2 weeks before he passed, we were on his porch, watching a buck, doe, and fawn cross my yard towards the stream. He passed me a bottle of scotch. I took a swig and did a double take on the label. Bowmore 25. This stuff was phenomenal. I took another swig and thought to myself that maybe we were celebrating something. We watched as the deer disappeared into the brush. Unexpectedly, Rory broke the silence. "Jerry, I'll be gone soon, and when I go, I reckon you'll be the one to find me. I ask that when that happens, you don't bother calling no one right away. I won't be going nowhere. I have one more bottle of this Bowmore in the cabinet. Always been my favorite. All I ask is that you come out here and finish that bottle before you go do anything else." I took another swig, smacked my lips with satisfaction, and held the bottle as I quoted Sam McGee. "A pal's last need is a thing to heed." The lines around his face and eyes shifted into a smile. He extended his hand for the bottle, took a shot, and quoted back. "It's fine in here, but I greatly fear you'll let in the cold and storm. Since I left Plumtree down in Tennessee, it's the first time I've been warm." He took another swig, as if to emphasize its warming effect. The morning I woke up and didn't hear "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," I knew. The walk across my cabin never seemed so long. I reluctantly put on my boots, still in my pajamas, and walked out the door. Rory was in his chair with a collection of cowboy poetry resting on his lap. For just a moment, I was optimistic enough to think that he'd fallen asleep. But as I got closer, the stillness of his chest was obvious. I carefully picked up his book and set it on my chair and proceeded to his cabin, determined to honor his last request. I was gonna miss the old man. He was my friend. When I say he was my friend, I mean he was my only friend. Best friend I ever had. I wiped away a tear as I reached the liquor cabinet. I pulled back the latch and looked around until I saw the dusty, expensive bottles in the back. In the far corner, the Bowmore label caught my eye, and I reached back to extract it. As I pulled it out, I could tell something was off. The bottle was light. It seemed empty. When I finally had it in good light, I thought for a moment that it was empty. Cheeky bastard, I thought. Then I noticed that the bottle was, in fact, not empty, but contained a number of rolled up pages. Intrigued, I took the bottle outside, smashed it on a rock, and piled up the pages. They were written in Rory's hand. I took them over to my chair and began to read. Jerry, I'm sorry to have had to leave you, but I'm sorrier to have left you without more of this delicious scotch. I only had one bottle and needed it empty so I could leave you this letter. Forgive an old man. But I've left plenty of good whiskey in the back of the shelf, and you're welcome to it. I'm sure you're more curious about the contents of this letter. I guess it's a will of sorts. Well, more a confession and complete last request. My attorney has my formal will. It's all yours, by the way, and I'm sure he'll see you soon. I hope it's enough to compensate for what I'm asking you to do. Before I ask, I think you need some background information. So, saddle up, my friend, and let's get going. I met Dolores in the summer of 1951. I had been cowboying for most of my life, and even though I loved it, I wanted to see the world before I'd be corralled into one place. So I moved east. I didn't know where I was going when I snuck onto that first train. I could have paid for the ticket, but that would have marred the romanticism of my journey. The unknown with a healthy dash of danger, for reasons that elude me now in my old age, was what I lived for. I think that's what first enamored me of Dolores. I'd gotten off the train in Pennsylvania and kept drifting east, hitching rides, finding odd jobs, and boarding with whomever would take me in. I was a gregarious and affable fellow back then, not the standoffish and crotchety man you know, so it was never difficult for me to find a way to get by and find folk willing to help. I reached the Hudson and ended up stopping in Hoboken, New Jersey, where I quickly found work at a factory. It was hard, but honest, the way work should be. About a week on the job, I left the factory for my lunch break, and that's when I saw her. It was her dress that caught my eye. This was years before the hippie movement, but she was dressed as if she'd traveled back in time in a psychedelic Volkswagen bus time machine. Her floral print and flowingness were like a summer wind making waves through a wildflowered mountain meadow. She reminded me of home, and when our eyes met, I was home. The unknown with a healthy dash of danger, remember? He'd never been more scared in my life, but I pretended I wasn't and marched directly towards her, introduced myself, and asked her to dinner. She looked me up and down thoughtfully. I remember staring at the way she ran her fingers through that long, sun-kissed blonde hair of hers as she replied, "But what if I'm hungry now, Rory?" I never liked my name much until then. Too rhotic. But her mouth seemed to kiss the vowels and cradle the R's in the back of her throat just right. She looked at me expectantly. Now it was my turn to look her up and down. I wasn't complaining about that. And when my eyes made their way back to her face, I released the grip on my lunch pail and let it clang against the sidewalk. Never averting my gaze, I punctuated the clang with a wry smile. She giggled, grabbed my hand, and we ran off hand in hand to a nearby deli. Those first few years flew by, the memories like fireflies, momentarily brilliant against the darkness, then fading into black, impossible to follow, until they shine again. Then autumn fell forever, the fireflies extinguished, and all the memories I have are dark. But the darkness I see perfectly. We'd moved into our first real house in Hackensack, both of us redefining our definitions of freedom to include a mortgage and children. Consequently, I found a steady, good-paying job, and we began trying to have children. Months of trying turned into a year, and the happiness we had began to fade. As the reality of our childless lives sunk in, my pain and sense of emptiness were terrible, but nothing compared to Dolores's. Sadness consumed her. I'd come home from work. It was nothing like people from the current generation think of when they picture the 50s. She wasn't waiting for me in a starched dress with a kiss and a meatloaf on the table. She loved me and wanted to greet me with a kiss, but her eyes were always red and puffy, her mascara a mess. I often ended up making dinner for us both and cleaned. I didn't mind. I just wanted her to be happy. I talked to her about adoption, but she'd insist it wasn't the same. She wanted to give me a child. She wanted to have my child. She wanted so much for us, and she blamed herself. The ladies in the neighborhood didn't help, pushing their prams everywhere, fawning over one another's children, and constantly asking my wife when we were finally going to start our own family. One tear too many trickled down her once smiling cheeks, and it was time to move. We were reminded enough of our infertility and didn't need an entire neighborhood constantly reminding us. So I moved us somewhere more secluded, somewhere I felt we could find some peace and purpose. We moved to the outskirts of a small town in southwest Missouri, where we homesteaded. This lifestyle gave Dolores the chance to put her mind on something else, and I let her take charge of the gardening. And things were better. For a while. I don't know exactly what drew her to the chrysanthemums, but once she planted them, She spent more time on them than any other plant, almost to the point of neglect. But she'd found something that made her happy, and I wasn't about to begrudge her that. I just had to do a little extra work to make sure the other plants were watered properly. It was worth it, though, to hear her lovely voice sing every morning, "Somewhere over the rainbow." It had been so long since she'd sung anything. It was the sweetest sound in the world. God, Jerry, I love that woman. She got to the point where she didn't want to leave them. She started talking to them more than she talked to me. And she wasn't the only one talking. Sometimes, when I'd come home, find her out back and greet her, she'd shush me and tell me how rude I was being to interrupt the flowers. She would apologize to them for me. Then at night, I'd wake up to find her side of the bed empty and cold, and I'd go downstairs and out the back door to find her asleep in the dirt. I'd pull a blanket over us and sleep with her on the wet ground. Months passed and things grew stranger. Worse. The house was full of sage, the windows lined with garlic. I'd find roots and basins full of noxious liquids under the bed. She kept a constantly roaring fire in the summer heat. And that's when Dolores started to talk in rhymes. It took some time to get used to and to understand what she was trying to say. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, if I asked her what she wanted to do for the evening and if it was a good day, she'd smirk and say something like, "Food, lewd, nude." And I mean, all a man really wants in life is food, lewd, and nude. But one day, I approached the house and saw the chrysanthemums all dug up. I went around back and saw mud tracked up the back door. I followed the trail through the house, up the stairs, and into the bedroom door. Dolores was lying naked on the bed, surrounded by dirt and flowers. A solitary budding chrysanthemum was stuck into a pile of mud she'd placed on her stomach. And there was blood everywhere. I raced to her side. "Dolores, what happened? What did you do?" She turned her head with a smile and said calmly, "Tell hell spell." Frantic, I asked, "Dolores, what spell did you tell hell?" She raised a slashed arm, which was dripping red, and pointed at her stomach. "Mud, bud, blood." I took her bloody arms in my hands, ripped off my shirt, and started tying it around as a tourniquet. I cried out, "Oh my God, why? Why, Dolores?" She looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "Baby, maybe baby." She reached over with her other hand and gave me a piece of paper, dirty from her hands. She then closed her eyes, and tears dropped into the dirt surrounding her. Her chest fell, and it never rose again. I wept hard and violently, the kind of sobbing that only those who have truly lost know. When I finally composed myself, I had to see what Dolores had left for me. I opened the paper and read, "My dearest Rory, I know it hasn't been easy for you. I wanted so badly to give you the child you deserve. I'm so sorry I failed you. I wanted to be a better wife. I wanted to bear your child. It's apparent now that I can't. I've tried all the spells, and none of them work. And I know you'd never leave me for another. So I've made a deal with him to sacrifice myself so that you can find another less broken than I. But don't think that I'm lost. I've ensured my immortality in the chrysanthemums. I'll mix my blood and tears with the mud, which will nourish the plants and make them bud and bloom, bright, strong, and tall. If you care for them and make them a part of you, I'll be a part of the child that you one day have, because I'll still be with you. And we'll all be together. I'll be with you forever, Rory, in the chrysanthemums. Care for them, and I've been promised that we'll all be happy together forever. Just take care of them, Rory. Love them, like you love me. Like I love you. Forever." Dolores. So I honored her last request and buried her in the flower bed with the mums on top. They grew like she said they would, bright, strong, beautiful, and tall. You've seen how I've made them a part of me. I did everything I could. But there was something I could never do, Jerry. I could never love again. I never found anyone else who made me feel the way she did. So we never had our child. But if I'd had a child, I would have wanted him to be like you. You're a good man, and I'd be proud to have you carry my name. I don't expect you to do that, of course. You have your own. But I hope that you will honor Dolores' request, and that now you'll honor mine. Bury me beneath the chrysanthemums. I want to rest with her. Tend to the flowers, and we will help them grow. Make them a part of you, and when you've found yourself a good woman and have children, we will continue on in them. I wish you a happy life, a life that Dolores and I never had. I give you everything that's mine in hopes that it may be of some use to you. Rory. Like I'd promised the old man, and like the poem says, a pal's last need is a thing to heed. So I drank some shots of his second finest scotch and set to work burying my friend amongst the bones of his beloved wife. I tended to the chrysanthemums and grew to love the peace that came with the chore. There's something honest about gardening, working with dirty hands. I began to sing to them and read them cowboy poetry. Sam McGee seemed to be their favorite. I even learned to love the peppery taste of the petals. There is nothing better in the winter than hot chrysanthemum tea. When I met Renee, she found this all very endearing. She thought it showed a sensitive side. We even exchanged our vows on that little porch Rory built. And I'm convinced that Eve was conceived on it in a moment of summer heat. But after Eve was born, Renee grew more distant. She said that even though she birthed her, she didn't feel like Eve was hers. It didn't get better with years. When Eve began to speak, she called me Dad, but never called Renee Mom. Just her or Nay. I came home one day to find Renee's things packed, her car gone, with Eve wailing and locked in her room, a chair pushed up against the door handle. After Renee left, it took all that I could just to stay afloat. I took care of Eve, but I neglected everything else. I lost weight. The house was always a mess and in dire disrepair. And the chrysanthemums died. When I saw they were dead, I tried to plant more, but they died and turned black mere moments after I placed them in the soil. I wept bitter tears into the dirt. This wasn't the life Rory wanted for me. He gave me everything, and I was left with nothing. Eve came outside and walked toward me unblinkingly. She stared at me a moment and looked at the blackened mum. She smiled and then began to jump repeatedly on top of the newly dead flowers. She jumped to the cadence of her own words. Me glad dad sad. Sad dad so bad. He mad dad bad. I pulled her off the flower bed, but she reached back with her hands and grabbed an untouched blackened mum and crumbled it in her hands. Eve, why are you talking like that? She pointed at the trampled flowers. No, Fed, bed dead. Then she pointed at me. On your head. She somehow escaped my grasp and calmly walked away, leaving me alone, as the rest of the chrysanthemums turned to dust and swirled around me as a cold breeze blew in.